Lindamood-Bell and everybody there be invested in my goals and saying, we're going to work with you to make them happen. I mean, that is the complete opposite of standard brain injury care. And it's so life-giving.
That's Shireen Jeejeebhoy, an author, blogger, and photographer who talks about her journey of recovery on today's Lindamood-Bell Radio. Lindamood-Bell has summer programs you can count on. Live, online, or in person, we are open. We're here for you and your family. Your student can catch up or get ahead before the new school year. Reading, comprehension, math, we have individualized instruction that you can count on. Here's our conversation. Welcome to Lindamood-Bell Radio. I'm here with Shireen Jeejeebhoy, a blogger, an author, and photographer, and she's written several books and posts frequently about issues in psychology and has a connection with Lindamood-Bell. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Tell me about your latest writings and what you've been musing on, thinking about lately.
Oh, okay. Well, my latest thoughts are because of this pandemic. Well, it started, with the pandemic, and I wrote an article for Psychology Today about welcoming the world to social isolation, because when you have a brain injury, you have a lot of isolation, and I was hearing people having trouble adjusting to being at home and isolated and away from their usual work. And these are the sorts of things that you experience when you first have a brain injury. You don't realize that this injury is going to dramatically change your life. And a lot of it is going to be that you are going to become more and more and more isolated, from your work or from your social life, from your friends, from your family. And so I felt like, because I've been living this for 20 years, not physically at home with no in-person human connection at all for this long, but still, even when you go to medical appointments every week, you're still in isolation because they're healthcare professionals. They're not, part of your personal daily life. So I felt like, I could speak to that, and also perhaps that people would start thinking about, this is what it's like, because a lot of people, they don't realize, because brain injury is invisible, what a catastrophic injury it is, and how much it changes your life, and how much it shifts you right outside of society, and perhaps personal experience of social isolation would perhaps make people think about what this is actually like.
And would you mind telling us about your personal experience with brain injury?
So with my brain injury, it was 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago. I was in a 4-car crash on a highway north of Toronto. And the injuries I thought were just whiplash. I'm double jointed, so I'm prone to my neck going further than other people's, and since I'd had a whiplash injury before 9 years earlier, I thought, well, I knew what to do, and the paramedics gave me some instructions. And the only thing that was really strange on the highway when the paramedics examined me was that my blood pressure was normal, and my entire life my blood pressure has been quite low. So it's never achieved normal. And of course, for the paramedics, it was like, well, normal is normal. So how could there be anything wrong? And then I was referred to the physiatrist I'd seen for the car crash I'd been in 9 years earlier. And he said he worked with a psychologist, and the psychologist said to me, I think you have a closed head injury. You need to go see an expert, and get properly assessed for that. So that was in April, and in September, I finally had a SPECT scan done and had a very good diagnostician basically say to me, you have a closed head injury. The SPECT scan will probably be normal because it's been so long since the injury. So when the SPECT scan came back abnormal, showing damage in pretty much my entire brain, he was, being a researcher, he was thrilled. I was like not too happy, obviously. But I had absolutely no idea what was coming to me. This was, I will follow rehab. I was already in a one-on-one rehab at the Toronto Rehabilitation Institute for neuro rehab, because I'd already been referred and they already took me and predicated on this diagnosis coming. And I just thought it'd be like everything else. You follow the instructions, you do what they ask you to do, and you'll get better. And that was not true.
And I know you said it affected your ability to read.
Yes.
And memory as well, right?
Yes. I had studied at U of T in psychology, and so I knew something about memory and concentration. I had actually, my third year thesis was in ADD. And I'd written a paper on memory as well. And I knew that my issues with memory were probably because of my concentration having pretty much gone. And if you can't concentrate, you can't remember because you don't take it in, and therefore it never gets encoded, and therefore you can't obviously retrieve anything because there's nothing there. The reading, I always had a book in my hand. I did not go anywhere without a paperback. I mean, I can barely remember, I can barely connect to that person who just read everything. You know, when I was a child, I'd read cereal boxes because I needed to read all the time. And so when the OT, the occupational therapist, said to me I think it was like December 2000, and she said, you can't read. I believed her because I'd been having so much trouble, but it was totally devastating. And that was the start of probably for me, the worst part of brain injury, because they knew that I couldn't read based on their observations, based on my symptoms, based on their experience and knowledge of other people with brain injury. But they hadn't done any EEG, and they hadn't done any detailed scans of my brain activity. So they didn't know which parts of my brain were really not working. So they suggested that I try audiobooks. And so I had I think it was called Handspring. It was a handspring device. It was like an early Palm. And I got a little thing, a little gizmo attached to it, and I listened to audiobooks, but I couldn't take them in. It was even worse than reading a paperback. I mean, my brain would go off somewhere else, and I didn't know where I was, and I would try and rewind, and I couldn't find my place. And well, it turned out when I had a QEEG done 5 years later that, well, there was a reason why audiobooks were harder, is because my auditory processing was pretty much kind of off. So that's why when I was watching TV, the volume was cranked up way high, not because I was deaf. It was because I couldn't take it in auditory, through my ears. So that was a really bad piece of advice, and it was given with caring, but it was bad because they didn't use the evaluative tools that were available to them, because there seems to be a prejudice against using QEEG in the medical community. But it would avoid this kind of thing happening if they did that.
And so it was not the decoding part of the reading, it was just the understanding what you've read? I mean, you could identify the words.
Yes, I could identify the words. I wasn't having problems recognizing letters or words. My reading would be like a car starting, like, in the old days, you would crank the key and it go chugga, 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 chugga. So I would read a sentence, it would disappear out of my head. I would read the sentence again, it would disappear out of my head. I'd read it a third time and finally it connected, and then I'd go on to the next sentence. It was really, and then eventually I'd get into some sort of rhythm. And but I wasn't retaining anything. I mean, I got to the point where I decided that the act of reading was okay. So even though I couldn't remember what I'd read before, I couldn't predict what was coming, I was simply in the moment of the page, which meant that I could only read series, like Agatha Christie's Poirot, because I knew Poirot. So it didn't matter that I would forget all the other characters or barely hang on to remembering who they were. At least I knew who Poirot was, and I knew the milieu in which he operated. And so I had a sense of the setting and that sort of thing. And then at some point that just was not good enough. It was, it's like, it's all this inspirational crap where they say, accept where you are and be happy with where you are and you're still alive. And it's like, why should I be happy with this? You haven't evaluated me appropriately and you haven't offered real treatment, and you're asking me to be happy with having lost something that was completely central to my identity. I mean, it was just when I was at the Toronto Rehab Institute, they did a stress management course that was part of the research. And so we had to do all these questionnaires. And the top stress management coping mechanism for me was reading. So how can I possibly manage my stress when reading is taken away? And then on top of that, eating is another coping mechanism. Well, I can eat and then I gain weight. And so now physically I'm worse off, right? So it was a complete abdication of responsibility towards me as a person and towards me as a human being and as a part of society, to not evaluate me appropriately and to provide inappropriate solutions, and then tell me to be happy with where I am at, to accept this brain injury and to accept the fact that I won't be able to read books again in the way that I used to.
It's been very frustrating.
Yeah.
How did you find Lindamood-Bell? What led you to that?
So about 5.5 years after my injury, when I realized that I couldn't problem solve my way out of a paper bag, I'd been Googling, I think, for 2 years for brain injury treatment, and I finally stopped doing that and looked for ADD treatment, and found the ADD Center. Dr. Linda Thompson is the director of that, and I did 2 years of brain biofeedback with her. And then that was 2005 to 2007. And then 2012, I went back to her and we did a gamma brainwave research project with her, which is a whole other story. And in all that time, I still had trouble with my reading, and I would talk to her about it. So I think she said it was a year earlier. So I think it was in 2017, she attended a workshop that Lindamood-Bell put on. And so in 2018, in the spring of 2018, she said to me, because I was talking about this again, that she'd heard about Lindamood-Bell and they do this reading evaluation and I should have it. She felt that I should have this evaluation so that I would finally face the fact that I would not be able to read books the way I used to. That was basically why she thought, and she liked the fact that it's objective. She's all for objective tests. With Dr. Thompson, she did the QEEG and evoked potentials and some other computerized tests. And so her entire clinic is based on the concept that you test with objective tests. So you don't you don't rely on subjective observations, whether externally or internally. So she liked that aspect of Lindamood-Bell. And so I followed up on that, and I think you guys were offering a $99 evaluation offer, and so I was like, okay, well, I can at least afford that. And but
you had an office in Toronto at that point, I believe.
It had been closed at that point.
It had been closed.
Yes, you did have an office in it, and actually I was a little confused because I think the office was still listed there, but it was closed. So I ended up being sent to, I can't remember. I think it's the Minnesota or Minneapolis.
Minneapolis, I think you have one of the suburbs there, yeah.
Yeah, and so we, there was a bit of a time zone confusion, but we got it all sorted, and exactly a year ago today, not a year, 2 years ago, June 4th, I had my first day of evaluation, and
you did it virtually too. Well,
and I did it online, and I have to say the fact that it was online was extremely attractive to me, because when you have brain injury, you have a lot of fatigue, and traveling is fatiguing, and being able to do it online means that there is no fatigue from traveling. So all my energy can go towards doing the evaluation and or the appointments. I don't lose an entire day just to get some training, which is what I do with my other medical appointments. I basically kind of lose an entire day whenever I attend another appointment in person. So this pandemic has been, kind of great in the sense that I've got this extra energy that I'm not used to, because I'm not spending it enduring the TDC, which is our public transit system, which is not very accessible. So being able to do the evaluation online, I was excited about that. I always, because of my studying psychology, I'm always kind of fascinated by these kind of tests, and whether it's EEG or the picture vocabulary, or whatever it is, by whichever clinic. It's kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, I should say that our battery of tests are they're nationally normed. We take sub-tests from different batteries and kind of look at word attack skills, vocabulary, comprehension, the ability to follow oral directions, and then we have a strong kind of paradigm that we look at vis-a-vis imagery. If there's an area that's like a decoding weakness, we go after that. If it's a comprehension piece, we look at that as well. And I know that you did work in the visualizing and verbalizing program.
Yes.
Also virtually, right? And in fact, it's
yes.
intercontinentally, I believe, right?
Yes, that's right. Because one of the key parts of Lindamood-Bell's program is intensity, and you got to do it every day, 5 days in a row. And the only way I could do that with my schedule was at night. And so the only office that was open at that hour was in Australia. And so the other aspect to that for me is because of my brain injury, I couldn't actually do 4 hours in a row. So we did 2 hours, 5 nights in a row, Sunday night to Thursday night, my time, because they're like 14, 15 hours ahead. So for them, it's Monday to Friday. For me, it was Sunday to Thursday. Mm-hmm. And that doubled the length of time of my training, because I was doing 2 hours instead of 4 hours. But it still worked, and it made it doable for me. Yeah.
And so you did that. How long did you do the intervention?
So that was it was 81 sessions, 81 hours. So that was July and August and a bit into September. I think I'd missed 1 or 2 hours during the July and August for appointments or something like that, but not too many. And then we just added them on at the end in September, and it was really neat. The trainers had all different accents, so they weren't all Australian. So obviously the Americans I found the easiest to understand. With my brain injury, I lost my ability to understand accents, and they've come back slowly. So luckily by 2018, it had come back enough that I could mostly follow most of them. There was one that I had a lot of trouble with, but with repeated exposure, I eventually was able to understand her well.
There's a strong Scottish Australian crew down there, I know.
Yes.
So it must have been. What was the actual instruction like? You're struggling in comprehending the language and encoding it into imagery, and you're forced to do that several hours each day. It must have been quite a challenge.
Oh, it was exhausting. But I had already learned that with brain injury, if you are not exhausted by the therapy you are receiving, your brain is not going to heal. So I already understood that by its very nature, this is going to be really tiring. And that's a key to me to know that something is working. And I was told, and it was emphasized that you guys work to the edge of ability. So they'd be upping the difficulty just as I got used to that level. And then they're like, okay, we're going to make it harder. And I'm like, could I just relax? But I'm actually wired to like a challenge. Like my brain is wired to like a challenge. So it was sort of like a combination of my brain loved it, and sometimes I wanted a break, but I really enjoyed the people I worked with. There would be a different tutor for each hour. And sometimes I'd meet Shannon I think I'd meet with Shannon every week, I think it was, or every 2 weeks, and for kind of like a mini assessment as to how I was doing. And that was really great too, because I'm used to with the brain biofeedback, you just keep working and working and working, and you don't see a change. And the person who has designed the program for you isn't checking in and discussing your progress. Whereas this, you're checking in regularly and discussing your progress and discussing how it's going, and if you're having any problems, or what benefits you're seeing, or things like that. And I feel like it's a kind of a connection that makes you feel like you're important, that somebody is keeping an eye on how you're progressing. It's that human connection, I think, that's so important in therapies like this.
And did you feel the progression yourself? Did you recognize that you were gaining ability?
I didn't see the progression that I'd heard about children having, like, hearing that like within a week a kid will suddenly flip and start reading on their own. I didn't have that kind of progression, but I could see that because I was they would up the level regularly, and that I was accomplishing that. But it was not till I think late August that I started to believe that I would be able to read a book again. And when they came up with a program for me, and I told them what my goals were, and my goal was to read fiction, to read philosophy, to read neuroscience journals. And, if you're going to read philosophy of mind, that's a pretty high level reading skill. And they told me that they could achieve that. I could only afford 80 hours. I couldn't afford the 120. Ideally, I did need the 120, and I could certainly still benefit from more. But I only had money for 80. Shannon and Andy, they came up with a great program to get me to my goals within 80 hours, which was phenomenal. And you know, having Lindamood-Bell and everybody there be invested in my goals and saying, we're going to work with you to make them happen. I mean, that is the complete opposite of standard brain injury care. And it's so life-giving.
Well, that's good to hear. And it's almost, so 2 years to the day was the initial testing, or you feel like you've retained the abilities and growth that you made?
So it is. I still am, you know, trying to do daily reading practice. I mean, definitely at the end, we could see how much I'd improved when they did the reevaluation. It's quite obvious, and I was quite obviously reading books differently. And I was reading the philosophy of mind materials easier than I had when I'd taken this course in 2012. I'd taken an Oxford short course, and my writing ability had saved me, not my reading ability. And so I'd used all sorts of strategies around that. Brain injury life is full of stressors, and I don't have the kind of social support that you really need to profit from these kinds of therapies to the maximum. So I'm reading fiction. I've read some nonfiction, but I still have to remind myself to visualize and verbalize when I read neuroscience articles. I still find it the concentration required and the fatigue from it difficult. The philosophy of mind I've had to put aside because the stressors in my life just made it too difficult to continue that. But it's something that, you know, I would like to get back to. But the fact that I am currently reading Rex Stout's Neurowolf. So these are a series of mystery books written in the, I think, 30s, 40s, 50s, you know, way back, and they're set in New York. And Neurowolf, I think there's even been a TV show starring Neurowolf. And I read his books. I don't remember how many decades back I started reading these books, but I had tried to read them when I was reading I'm accepting reading as just in the moment, you know, and I know these characters. I know Neurowolf and I know Archie Goodwin. I don't care if I remember all the other characters. So that was the last time I read these books. So I picked up one about 3 weeks ago. I borrowed the ebook from the library because you can't borrow paperbacks right now.
Yeah.
And I had to remind myself to visualize and verbalize, not go back into the old way of reading. And then once I did that, it was like, wow, I see nuances of Archie Goodwin I'd never seen. I'm retaining imagery and his character nuances. I'm seeing humor I hadn't caught on before. I mean, brain injury steals your humor, your sense of humor. But for me to be able to recognize it is difficult, but to respond to it, to not only recognize it, but also respond to it is huge. And I mean, there's a richness in reading this book that I have not experienced in the last 20 years. And this is just a deceptively simple book. It's actually, there's an awful lot within Rex Stout's simple language. It's very rich. And because of visualizing and verbalizing, I'm enjoying it because I'm following the plot and I'm remembering the characters, and I can connect things back to something I'd read several chapters earlier. You know, I mean, it's just a whole different experience, and it's absolutely fabulous.
You feel like you're writing his has changed as well?
My writing. Has my writing changed? That's a good question. I know my ability to watch videos and movies and TV has changed. I'm better able to follow and learn. I relearned how to write. I don't remember. I think 3 years or so after my injury. And I did write about that in my book, Concussion is Brain Injury, having to relearn how to write. And it is strange that I could write without being able to read books.
That is, it seems like the expressive act would be much more challenging than the receptive of just reading and taking it in, but having to generate.
Well, but the expressive act is actually, it turns out that the expressive act of talking and writing are easier than listening and reading. Because it's coming from within you, what you already have. Whereas when you're taking it in, you have to concentrate. Your brain has to move it around the different parts of your brain. You have to process it. Like my Wernicke's area, my Broca's area were kind of off. So, and when they did the QEEG on me in 2005, they told me, this is why you have trouble reading. They gave me neurophysiological reasons for why I had so much trouble reading. But writing, like when I first began, like my very first book, Lifeliner, the chapters are very short. Because that was as long as I can concentrate to remember to write. I write my chapter in one go so that I do not lose my thought process. If I take a break, I'm going to lose my thought process. So it doesn't matter how tired I get, I just have to write to the end of the chapter, and I use outlines so that I know where I am in the book that I'm writing. I am better able, I'm not completely blank when I'm writing now in terms of what did I write the day before. So that part has changed. I am able to write longer. I think instead of 800 words, I can go as much as 3,000, even maybe 6,000 words in one go. I write very quickly, so that's like an hour and a half. And then I take a long break. But I would say maybe the research is a bit easier because the play I wrote in last November, I had to do a lot of reading of new concepts to me that would have been difficult for me to retain, if not impossible for me to retain before visualizing and verbalizing. But I did manage to retain most of it and be able to kind of marry these new concepts with what I'd known for most of my life and write a play.
Wow. And where can one find your writings?
So, well, I have all my books are on the ebook stores like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Smashwords. I have a website, jeejeebhoy.ca, and my books are listed on there.
I'll spell that for people too. It's Jeejeebhoy.
Yes.
Jeejeebhoy. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a new website being launched by a writers organization here in Canada called fanship.fan. It's a website for readers and writers, and they use blockchain technology so that when readers buy an ebook through Fanship, they know that the copyright belongs to the author that is attached to that book, and that the actual author, is getting paid for it. So there's so it's a way to connect readers and writers, and then it's also got like I think they call it applaud. So if you want to tip your favorite writer, you can tip it through that, and you can send recommendations and ratings and stuff. And then the City of Toronto, because of the pandemic, has started what they call a Shop Here program for small business and artists. And I've been accepted into that program, and they're currently working on my website. And so my artwork and my books will be available through that. I don't have an address right now because it's still being drafted, but as soon as it launches, I will have an address for it.
Great. And what, do you have a current project that you're working on?
Well, my book, Concussion is Brain Injury, Treating the Neurons in Me, is updatable through password-protected web pages on my site, jeejeebhoy.ca. So when you buy the book, you get the password, and I updated the book last year through these web pages, and I will probably be looking at updating again this July. Any sort of new information that I have. In terms of big projects, the play that I wrote in November is called Resurrection, the Play. And I wrote it because I was, well, first of all, things just come to me and then they get really urgent and they need to come out and they need to be written. And it just felt that this play needed to be written last year. And I thought that everybody writes plays, the passion play, but where's the play on the resurrection? You know, that's the play that's about hope. You know, that the whole point of it was the resurrection. So why is there no play on the resurrection?
We do.
Yeah, no, not that I could find anyway. So that's something that I worked on, and I do need some feedback on it, but I haven't found anybody yet who can give me some feedback on it. Somebody who has some good knowledge of theology and all that kind of stuff, you know.
Well, maybe one of our listeners will provide some feedback for you.
Yeah, that would be cool. There's a chasm between the way brain injury is treated and all other kinds of injuries and health problems are treated. And the way people with brain injury are treated, it's basically, the idea is that we'll give you strategies and you go out and be inspired and accept where you are, and maybe we'll give you a little bit of rehab. Or if you have some money and you have some ability to go out and find your own care, you can find a clinic here and a clinic there, and you become your own case manager. Or if you're fortunate enough, maybe you have a relative who becomes your own case manager and pulls them all together. The fractured form of brain injury care is stressful, it's difficult, and it means that you're really getting a patchwork of help. So, you know, I go to Lindamood-Bell for my reading. I go to the ADD Center for actual neurophysiological direct healing of my injury. I go to Meditech for laser therapy so that my muscles and the brainstem can be treated with concussion therapy. And then I have at-home devices. And it is exhausting pulling all these things together. And what I would really like to see is a kind of comprehensive care, pulling that people are evaluated fully. I mean, I hear that there are people with brain injury who never get a sleep study. And to me, that is appalling, because one of the things that is absolutely for sure shattered by a brain injury is your sleep. And everybody should have a sleep study. And there's no collaboration between any of the professionals, you know.
It'd be difficult to be a patient and an advocate at the same time.
Yes. And there needs to be collaboration. And I tried to talk to a brain injury resource center here in Toronto about, you know, how can we bring reading rehab to people with brain injury? Because this is life-changing. When the only thing that I talk about that gets everybody interested who has a brain injury is reading. There is so much despair over the loss of reading, and the healthcare professionals just brush it aside. They really just do not understand how deep the despair is at the loss of book reading. Yeah, I mean, I would love to see Lindamood-Bell's visualizing and verbalizing program, and maybe for other people who have actual problems with decoding, those programs as well, brought into brain injury care. You know, I don't know how much of a factor it was that I'd had all this other treatment before I came to Lindamood-Bell, how successful I would have been without that treatment. I think it is crucial that I had my concentration restored before I started Lindamood-Bell. But this is a vast audience of people who want their reading back, and they need this kind of hope.
I'd love to see that expand as well. And I want to thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Good discussion. And again, I'll spell your last name if people want to Google and find that. It's Jeejeebhoy. And Shireen is your first name, Shireen. And thank you for being on Lindamood-Bell Radio.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful to be able to talk about this.
And thanks to you, the listener. Just a note, June is Brain Injury Awareness Month in Canada, and you can find Miss Jeejeebhoy's blog on psychologytoday.com and fanship.com. Her photos are on Flickr, and you can find Lindamood-Bell on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and at our website, lindamoodbell.com. We are Lindamood-Bell.